death is expressed in the sense that you return to the former.
Right, but that's just an expression. It means joining them in the same sepulcher. That's what it means. I understand. You may believe that it's no, and I understand, but that's beyond the scope of discussion.
He's just telling what Sadducees believe.
And pardon me?
To say what the Sadducees believe.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not giving an interpretation. He's telling what the different sects believe.
From my understanding of the situation,
wasting time.
The belief in afterlife does not exist before the time of the Pharisees.
No, it doesn't.
And regardless, even if it did, the Sadducees clearly did not believe in that. Okay, that is very clear.
Not his talk. He's giving the history.
And Sadducees are very important.
Definition.
Now, why are the Sadducees so important? I want to mention another thing.
It's so important.
Now, so far, I've described to you that the Sadducees were presumably disciples of Antigonus, right? However, this is not so clear at all. Who was actually a person named Tzadok? Does anyone know? Who was Tzadok?
Tzadok HaKohen.
Exactly, Tzadok HaKohen. And do you really think that that's not related to the actual Tzadok? Of course not. It's based on the actual historical Tzadok. Tzadok was a priest during the times of Solomon. And he was, after the revolt of Absalom, Abiathar didn't support him. And it was two priests under David. Under David there was Abiathar and there was Solomon. Abiathar somehow didn't go along with Solomon, and he fell out of favor. Tzadok was essentially sanctioned. He was hired. He became the high priest, and ever since then, he was the official, legitimate high priest in the temple worship. And later, after the exile, when they returned, the Bnei Tzadok. If you look at Chronicles, if you look at Ezra and Nehemiah, you'll see it repeatedly mentioned. The sons of Tzadok. Okay. They were the legitimate priests. So in reality, when we say the Sadducees, we're talking about a school of thought that stems from whom? The leading aristocratic priestly faction in Judaism during the early Second Temple period. That's the Sadducees. And those are the people who did not believe in afterlife, who did not believe in resurrection of the dead, did not believe in eschatology, the end of days, and all that. So this is pretty important.
But how does that reconcile with the fact that in the prophetic books, it talks about the valley of dry bones, the bones coming?
We already talked about it. You're repeating the same thing that he did. The prophetic books, they don't talk about life after death. There's a lot of midrashic reinterpretation of scripture to validate this belief in afterlife. But once we become so caught up with this flow, you tend to lose sight of the fact that the scripture isn't actually saying that. I mean, there's obviously.
Could you just drop the word explicitly in there, because what you're saying.
Thank you, explicitly. Yeah. Va'amech kulam tzadikim la'olam yirshiyar. So Chazal say, okay, it says la'olam yirshiyar. I don't know exactly how that Darash works.
Now let me just jump in here one more second.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. He's going to continue along the line that he's saying, and it lets everybody know that later there will be a discussion about this, and the point is made, this thing called the machar, which means you want a protest. And some people here want to protest the ideas that he's saying. So the protest is duly noted, that what he's saying, some people feel is somewhat tainted by his own opinion, and we're duly noted. Please don't go away with the idea that this is the truth, the absolute truth, and the only truth. Some of it is slight interpretation, slight reinterpretation as well on his part. So protest is duly noted, and we will continue further, and the discussion will continue after.
Thank you, Yitzchak. Very well said. Okay. So now I'm going to give you several examples of the Hellenization of the Jewish culture in the 3rd century BC. This is the first.
Working in creation is an important concept. Started talking about
Working and creation.
In other words, the award.
Oh, award and punishment?
The award is the word itself.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Oh, how does that relate?
Yeah.
Good point. Right.
I think it's an
Right.
important
Okay.
point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let me expand on that. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Right. I don't know about Kabbalah, but as far as the Pharisee versus Sadducee discussion is concerned, let me elaborate on that further. Okay. According to the Sadducees, they didn't believe in the afterlife. What does that mean? That means essentially that the experience in this world is all that matters. Okay, if you're going to toil in this world, if you're going to work your ass off, you better get a reward in this world. If you're not, something is wrong. Okay? This is partly why this attracted the aristocracy. The aristocratic person is more likely to subscribe to this point of view because the aristocratic person is having it good in this world. So he's okay with this notion that this world is all that matters. What about the person, the peasant, who is working day and night, right, 12 hours a day, and he doesn't see any reward at all, and he has no future? Okay, for him, this philosophy doesn't work. Okay, this world is nothing to me. So for them, it's much more attractive to believe in an afterlife. And this is how essentially the two philosophical schools relate to each other. Essentially, and this is confirmed by Josephus. Josephus has it very clearly that the Sadducees were the philosophy of the aristocracy, the well-to-do, and he says it very clearly, Josephus, and he says that the Pharisees, they had the allegiance of the masses.
99%.
The 99%. There you go. 99% of the people, they follow the Pharisees. The Sadducees, he identifies them very clearly with the priestly classes, who were obviously in control. They're the 1%. They were the ones in, at least religiously in power. Politically, they were under other empires, at least until the Maccabean revolt. And so this is Josephus makes it very clear. So this basically meshes very well with the divergent political ideas, as I described. Okay. So now let me mention several examples of how the Hellenization manifested itself. First of all, you had coins that were found archaeologically. They bear the engraving of Ptolemy and his wife and an eagle. An eagle basically represented Ptolemaic hegemony over its empire. So these coins were minted during the 3rd century. This is the first 100 years after Alexander conquered Judea. So you see from these coins that in Judea, to some level, I don't know exactly how deep that was, but at least at some level, they adopted this Greek ideas and culture. Another thing that was found archaeologically is jar handles. Jar handles were found to contain the stamp of Rhodes. What does this mean? They imported wine from Rhodes. Now, this is important for two reasons. For one, it shows that there was commercial ties, right? There was some level of interaction. But far beyond that, it also shows the fact that they drank wine from pagans. What's going on here?
They had a mashgiach over there. I don't know.
They had a mashgiach. Pagan wine! You can't give us guff on that. You should fire the mashgiach.
What year is this? What year was this?
This is the 3rd century, between 300 and 200. This is before the whole Maccabean period.
Pagan wine was a problem those days?
Oh,
isn't it later?
Thank you. That's what I was going to say right now. Was pagan wine a problem?
It wasn't.
We know that pagan wine is forbidden from rabbinic sources, right? So people who make this argument, they're trying to project the rabbinic life on this earlier era, but that's not necessarily the case. Because the idea of avoiding all pagan contact, and especially the Yain Nesach notion, might not have developed, and actually conceivably so, did not develop until many years later, until at least the Pharisaic period. The Pharisees were the forerunners of the rabbinic movement, and so likely...
There's also this idea, and I'm sorry to interrupt, there's also this idea that you have some Jewish religious sources would say this, and others as well, that the majority of the people, the majority of the time of Nach, were idol worshippers. The Maharal says that.
Of the Nach, but this is not the time of
right,
Nach.
No, so I'm saying that it should carry through that not everybody followed the cultic religion, and not everybody was so 100%. You find many burial chambers which follow totally pagan ideas and stuff like that. It's not to find the handles of the jars of wine. However, it's not necessarily indicative of something other than no doubt. This was no doubt.
I want to respond to that. Good point that you're making. Okay, there might have been dissent, not necessarily that homogeneous. That's what you're saying. However,
I'm saying that it always was that way. I'm making you a point maybe in a certain way more than you're making it, and saying it lasted a much longer time than just this bit.
I have one reservation about that, which is that we know from the Ezra and Nehemiah period, which was the 5th and 4th century, right, the century before the Greeks came in. We know that they basically purified the cult. They went out of their way. They forced, for example, people to divorce foreign wives, right? So essentially, they purified everything. They removed all adulterations of Jewish worship. And so I would tend to believe that when the Greeks came in, before they came in at least, Judaism was a very what's my word?
Pristine?
Right. It wasn't contaminated by outside sources. And whoever was Jewish, if you wanted to adopt something else, if you wanted to practice pluralism, you weren't Jewish. Okay, you could go your way. If you were Jewish, then you were dedicated only to the God, to Yahweh, and to Judaism. Okay? It was a pure religion when the Greeks came in. All right. But what happened 100 years later? Now you have now you have a lot of other things happening and contamination. Thank you.
One quick question. Now, you said Rhodes. Is that Rhodes, the island?
I mispronounced it.
Yeah,
Rhodes,
I think so. It's
right?
Rhodes. Yeah, I've been
Thank
on the
you.
island.
I'm not good at
And
pronouncing things.
And it's very interesting because it's run by the Greeks and the Turks. They have a shared...
Nowadays,
even to this day.
yeah, right.
So there was that kind of a central clearinghouse point in
Right. But
Rhodes.
back then it was definitely a Greek island. There were no
Yeah.
Turks to begin with. It was a Greek island. Okay, another interesting thing that I should mention is Onias. What's Onias in Hebrew? Anyone know? Pardon? Did anyone say something?
What is it? What language is it in now?
Onias is English. O-N-I-A-S. Onias is Chonya. Chet Vav Nun Yud Hey. Chonya. It's mentioned in the Talmud, it's mentioned in other Jewish literature, Chonya. So anyway, so there was this king Onias. He was from the Sadducite lineage, and he had a correspondence in the 3rd century. He corresponded with the king of Sparta. Okay, so the king of Sparta writes to him, and I quote, this is a very interesting quote, "A document has been discovered concerning the Spartans and the Jews, that they are brothers, and both are from the seed of Abraham. Your cattle and property are ours, and whatever belongs to us is yours." Shali, shalach, shalach, shali. How nice. So this is a king of Sparta sending this letter to Onias, who was, first of all, you see the Greek name, obviously, Onias, it's not a Hebrew name. But anyway, so this was a Sadducite priest, the 3rd century. So he's making, essentially, out of his own initiative, he's creating this alliance. You're mine, mine, yours, your cattle is mine, of course. And...
We're brothers.
So, yeah, we're brothers, exactly. So this is very interesting, this discovery, because first of all, a document has been discovered. I've scoured through the whole Hebrew Bible, and I haven't found anything. As far as I know, Yavan, all right, is descendant from Japheth, which was not a descendant from Abraham. So I don't know what he's talking about. And secondly, what is he saying here? Your cattle is mine, ours is yours. Is he trying to foist his own empire? This is not a treaty, really. This seems more one way than mutual. But at any rate, it might have been mutual. And I would also tend to believe that they're basically inventing documents, inventing new notions in order to consolidate a political entity here. But the bottom line here is that it was in the mutual interest of both parties to cooperate. Okay, so that's the result. And so we see from this that at least at some level, okay, I don't know if Onias represented the entire Jewish population at the time, but at some level there was an interest both among the Jews and among the Greeks to join forces and to cooperate. Okay, the effects of Hellenism. Let's see. One of the effects was that up until then, like I mentioned, I kind of hinted on that earlier about the purification process. It was a unified, coherent, single religion. Okay, after the Greeks were introduced, now you have different schools of thought, different opinions, different sects. Okay, this is a term that Josephus uses a lot. Different sects. He refers to obviously the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Okay, we'll talk about them later if we get to it. And so now you have different sects. So sects is not, I should note that sect doesn't mean literally that they are completely set apart from the mainstream, like they have their own members, okay, and they practice some cult that is different from the mainstream. Sect simply means a school of thought. Okay, the Greek word that represents the modern English word of sect means a school of thought. So essentially, what Josephus is saying is that there were several ways of approaching philosophies and other aspects of culture. One of them was, like I said, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. And so now you have this division, different movements trying to advocate a different approach politically, religiously, socially. It was multifaceted. It wasn't just one, it wasn't just politically. When somebody, for example, opposed Greek domination, they also opposed Greek culture. Okay? And the same thing vice versa. So everything was wrapped into one. And another interesting thing that I should mention is the letter of Aristeas. Has anyone heard of that? The letter of Aristeas? Okay, I'll give you a hint. The Septuagint. Okay, the letter of Aristeas, Septuagint.
Yes, the Greek second books.
The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. How do you pronounce it? Septuagint. Okay. 70. Right, 70, right. So according to the letter of Aristeas, there were 72 scholars that were commissioned by the Greeks to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek. They were brought over into Egypt. Okay, this was at the time when Ptolemy controlled Judea. Okay, so Ptolemy obviously was the ruler of Egypt, and so he brought over these Jewish scholars into Egypt. And according to the letter of Aristeas, there were 72 scholars, and allegedly that's where we get the name of Septuagint, which means 70. And so these scholars translated the Bible into Greek. So this is also a very interesting phenomenon because, first of all, why did they translate it? A lot of scholars ask this question. I mean, this was a major feat, a major accomplishment. Why did they do it? Did they do it because the Greeks wanted to learn the Hebrew Bible? Or perhaps
Their version.
perhaps what?
Create their own version.
No. Exactly. The Jews were speaking Greek.
Right.
They didn't understand their own Bible. How about that? You had Jews. There was a major settlement of Jews in Egypt at the time already. I know this is still the time of the Second Temple period, but the Greek culture was much more sophisticated and more prosperous. So many Jews actually lived there. They still had religious allegiance to Judea, but materially they wanted to be in Egypt. And so these people, they didn't speak Hebrew. Okay, they were completely integrated socially and culturally with the local population, but religiously they still looked up to Judea, and so they wanted to learn about their own heritage, and they wanted to understand the Hebrew Bible, so they wanted to translate it. So that's a possibility. That's a very viable possibility. But the other option is also possible, that the Greeks, the Greeks were pursued knowledge for knowledge's sake. They had a library in Alexandria, and they wanted to be able to access the Hebrew Bible in order to basically glean from it, cull from it, whatever useful information, whatever useful elements they can find. So that's another possibility. But the bottom line here is that this shows, that again, this is the 3rd century BC, this is the time when Ptolemy ruled Judea. And so we see this interaction, we see the fact that there is this cross-cultural current between these two cultures. I want to mention also several books from, some of them are included in the, what do they call it, the Apocrypha, or what do they call it, the Christians, but there's another, there's pseudepigrapha also in Apocrypha. There's two terms. I'm not sure which one it is.
Yeah, the Apocrypha, specific in the pseudepigrapha, is what was not included in the
Apocrypha. Oh, thank you. Okay, I wasn't clear. I always forget which one is which. Okay, so this probably falls under Apocrypha. The Apocrypha is Sparta Chitzonim. It's basically things that in the Christian time period were not considered part of the Jewish canon. So since they were not considered part of the Jewish canon, they were not officially, at least in some Christian circles, they were not considered authoritative. So anyway, so some of these books were written during this period, during these 100 years. They may have been written in Greek. Like Kohelet is a good example, Ecclesiasticus, and we don't know. I mean, it's obviously we know it in Hebrew, but Kohelet definitely draws a great deal. Primarily, it draws from Greek philosophy, and in fact, Kohelet, if you analyze, if you read the book critically, if you read it carefully, the actual conclusion of that book essentially is that there is no point in doing the right thing. That's actually the conclusion of that book. Because this whole world is worthless, it's all bullshit, right? You don't get rewarded for doing the right thing, so you might as well just screw screw around.
That's definitely interpretation. I mean, to everything there's a
Interpretation of what? Of the book of Caliph?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it is.
Saying,
But that's,
saying that Ecclesiastes says that everything is bullshit.
maybe it's very,
Definitely
actually, the message of Kohelet is a little obscure. We don't know exactly what he's saying, but
What does the last sentence say?
but he could be sarcastic there. I know that last so Dover Hakol
Just Hellenism
and you know what? It could have been added. It could have been added by a later.
There are some people who say it was added.
Exactly. It could have been added
Some
by a
people say
later
the last
person in order to make it conform to official religious dogma. So we don't know anything about Kohelet.
The original Aramaic or
But I think it's a,
The
It
original.
was written by Shlomo.
We don't know that it was from Muslim. It's authorship is vague.
Oh, the language at the time was Aramaic. Of people, non-Hellenized Jews spoke Aramaic. Hellenized Jews probably spoke Greek.
Way before that.
No, it wasn't. No, it was not in the Mishnah.
What?
No way, Jose. It was,
But one more little, again, we'll say that there are different ideas and opinions of what it was, and again, another protest has been lodged that King Solomon was the one who wrote Kohelet. As he said, it goes back and forth. It could be the last sentence was added, it could be, it wasn't. It seems very confusing, and you can't really. He wrote it while he was away on vacation, exactly. And to Jacob as well, he can't draw a conclusion, and you can't draw a conclusion this way or that way. Would you stipulate to that? So when we sign the protest?
well, the notion that Solomon wrote Kohelet is totally beyond any
You're suggesting somebody
entertainment.
else wrote it pretending that he's Solomon?
Nobody pretended. He's not claiming that it's Solomon. Nobody said it's
The
Solomon.
book itself.
The book doesn't say that. What does it say? What does it say?
Right.
It doesn't say Solomon.
The richest king of all.
It doesn't say Richard. It doesn't say nothing. It says
It doesn't say. Also, there's an
it says
idea.
Melech Yisrael. That's all it says.
There's also an idea of pseudepigraphia.
And Melech Yisrael, the Greeks were called themselves kings. They called themselves basileos. In Greek, nonetheless, they call themselves kings. Okay, we're not going to get to that, unfortunately. But the Greeks, after they constituted their Hasmonean monarchy, they considered themselves kings. So yes, they.
And it was very, very common in that era, in subsequent eras, to ascribe, if some schnook was writing some book and he wanted to become a bestseller, so he'd say that guy wrote it. A similar thing, and everybody get your tomatoes ready, a similar thing has been said about the Zohar. Because it all of a sudden it pops up at one period, in the 1200s or even later, it just pops up and it's ascribed to Rav Shimon bar Yochai. We have no tradition that he wrote it, and that's what people did. Among Christian writers, amongst Jewish writers, you have it today. It's different than plagiarism, but somewhat similar. You wanted to hook your star, hook your name to a star.
Exactly. In those days, it wasn't about becoming famous. It was about propagating certain beliefs. And if you can hook it onto a major figure, a prominent figure, then you would do that. That's what people did. It was normal to do that.
some people quote a certain thing.
Abraham.
The question
I don't even want to go into that. Totally beyond my discussion. Okay, next. Okay, Ecclesiasticus, another book. There was a major Jewish scholar at the time, a Jewish person called Ben Sira. Okay, very important person. And so he wrote a book called Ecclesiasticus, and it seems from the book that he actually reaffirmed traditional Jewish values. So the irony is that Kohelet is included in the canon, and Mensira's book isn't, and it should be the reverse, because Mensira is probably what it seems he is standing up for traditional Jewish values, traditional moral values, and whereas Kohelet is questioning it. But anyway, both of them are definitely Hellenistic inspired. They're inspired by Greek ideas and Greek polemics. Jubilees is another book, and it's characterized by a polemic in favor of the observance of Sabbath and circumcision, which begs the question of why do you have to talk about it if not there are people who don't do it, right? When the Torah says, for example, don't worship idols, that's because you had people like Jeroboam who worshipped idols, right? So nobody tells you to do something that you wouldn't be inclined to do anyway. So we have this. We have reason to believe that many of the Jews became Hellenized to such an extent that not only did they adopt cultural norms from the Greeks, but they also abandoned certain basic elements of their faith, which including Sabbath and circumcision. Now, these two things, I want to make a note out of these two things: Sabbath and circumcision. Does anyone know about the priestly source in the Old Testament? Right, the priestly writer, documentary hypothesis, the priestly writer. One of the things that distinguishes the priestly writer is the concept of a oath berith, the sign of the covenant. He doesn't mention that, he doesn't talk about that a lot, but the priestly writer specifically applies this term to circumcision, to milah, and to Shabbat. And he considered these two, which scholars believe were adopted or at least bolstered during the period of the Babylonian exile. So he believes, according to which is the time when the priestly author operated in, so he believed that these two things are the fundamentals, the building blocks, the defining marks of Judaism, is the circumcision and the Sabbath. And so part of the reason maybe why these two came to the forefront in those years is because the Greeks wanted the Jews to acculturate, and the first thing you would do is remove these signs, okay, these ethnic markers, okay, that Jews consider the sign of the covenant between them and their God. So if you eliminate that, there is no covenant. There's no covenant, then the religion disappears. Okay, the berith was a very important concept. And the concept of covenant goes back to ancient Near East cultures in which it's a binding contract. I do the will of Yahweh, and He sticks up for me. He will be there when I need Him. And this was a very important driving force behind what kept Judaism going all those years. Okay, So that's another thing that is important to note. Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, was probably written in the Greek period, and despite the fact that the rabbis tried to ascribe it to the notion of God loving Knesset Yisrael, the ecclesia, Knesset, I'm using the Greek word ecclesia, the community of Israel. Most likely, it was written as a simple erotic love song between a man and a lover, and it was written in the Greek period. Another interesting phenomenon is apocalyptic literature. What's apocalyptic literature? It's literature that talks about the end of days. It talks about a sudden calamity befalling mankind and only the righteous people surviving. And you see this in the book of Enoch, which is probably in the Apocrypha, I believe, or in the Pseudepigrapha. I'm not sure. I get confused between the two. Pseudepigrapha. Okay, there you go. And there's also a book in the Bible that is apocalyptic, and that is anybody? Daniel. Who said that? Thank you, Daniel. Daniel 7-12 is apocalyptic. It specifically addresses the end of days. What will it be like after all these major superpowers that are currently in control, after they become wiped away, what's going to happen? And essentially it tends to deal with a topic called theodicy. Has anyone heard that term? Theodicy?
Yes.
What's that?
Theodicy, you said?
Theodicy.
Yeah.
Yeah, what does that mean?
To justify God in the face of evil?
Thank you. Justify God in the face of evil. So what does that mean? Essentially it means we're oppressed, okay, we're doing the right thing, things are not going well. How can God do that to me? Okay? How can God do that to me? There's got to be an explanation to this. So this is how this whole apocalyptic movement came up, and this also explains, like we hinted to earlier, it explains how the Pharisaic belief in the afterlife and other things might have evolved, at least according to my opinion. You can disagree, but apocalyptic literature is very suggestive of this. That you tend to get this idea that the people are living under severe duress, and they're trying to basically look ahead to a future when things will be rosier. And this is why they tend to concentrate on the end of days at a time when things will radically change for the better. Okay, let's fast forward. Isaac, how much more time do I have?
As much. When people start grumbling, that means
Okay.
Falling asleep.
Okay.
Let's do like this. Let's do 15 minutes more.
Yeah?
15 minutes more.
And then we'll take a vote.
And then we're going to give another bang on the table and say all those who don't want to listen any further should, yes.
If we're going to do something like that, can we really get to the topic? Because the Hellenism versus...
I know, I didn't get to it, unfortunately.
So let's do 15 minutes more, and then we'll break, so to speak. And those that want to stick around, come a little closer, and we'll.
Okay. Okay, good. Now we're going to get to the Maccabean period. Yeah, right. Yes, like I said, definitely, because the Jews suddenly found themselves being oppressed by King Antiochus. We didn't discuss it yet, actually, but due to that repression, suppression, and all that, they felt that there's no other way out. The only way to reconcile God with reality is to believe that there's got to be a missing piece to this puzzle. Okay, let's fast forward. 175 BCE. What happened at that? Oh, first of all, I missed the thing. 200 BCE. Okay. So now we're talking at a time when Ptolemy controls Judea and basically the entire land of Palestine, whatever you want to call it. Canaan. It was not called Palestine, I know. But later it was called Palestine. Okay. Canaan, or Israel, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't called Israel either because it was Judea, really. But I'm referring to the whole land, not just Judea, it was only the hill country around Jerusalem. So I'm talking the whole land. The Levant, but the Levant is even greater. Okay, so that area, was traditionally called Canaan, was controlled by the Ptolemies. So approximately 200 BCE, a major battle, a major war was fought between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And finally, the Seleucids won. The Ptolemies lost. Egypt lost control over Judea. They lost control over Canaan, and it went over into the control of the Seleucids. Now, at the beginning, the Seleucids treated the Judeans just like any other conqueror would, which is trying to gain their favor. Okay, when the Americans conquer Iraq, what do? They throw them cannons. That's the first thing you do. Okay, be the nice guy.